So we had a little bit of a development over the weekend, I guess late Friday. We had two decisions come out. I'll talk about the one that applies to more of you first. So you guys have heard me talking about the OSHA ETS since it came out in November. This is the emergency temporary standard intended to apply to what we call large employers, so employers with 100 or more employees. You all know that it had been stayed by the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, but it was turned over to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals for further proceedings. And so Friday night, the Sixth Circuit dissolved the stay. In record time, I guess anticipating that it was going to happen, we saw a coalition of 26 trade groups, in addition to others, file emergency applications to the U.S. Supreme Court requesting a stay pending Supreme Court review. We don't have an answer on that yet. OSHA then put out a statement on its website granting employers a limited grace period to comply with the ETS's requirement. So this is what OSHA is saying. I'll let you guys, I won't read that whole thing, but if you just go into OSHA.gov, it's there. But basically, per OSHA's statement, employers now have until January 10th to develop compliant policies and until February 9th to begin their testing program. So previously, those deadlines were beginning of December, beginning of January. They're basically pushed back a little bit more than 30 days each. So what does that mean for you? So hopefully you've been thinking about this. We've talked about the ETS even after the stay. We've been talking about the ETS in almost every town hall. And what I've said to you is a couple of things. Figure out if you're covered, right? Basically, it's 100 employers. It includes your fully remote workers. It's not limited to one site. Includes your part-time employees, but not your independent contractors. I got another question yesterday from a member. Well, does it include employees working outside the United States? We have 75 employees in the United States, but we have hundreds more around the world. There's no clear answer to that from OSHA. Again, I think we interpret this as, if you want to be conservative as an employer, you interpret this through the lens of knowing that the government is trying to mandate vaccines for as many people as possible. So you kind of go with that. If you have separate but related entities, ETS is basically saying, we've talked about this before, if they both go to the same policies for safety matters, they handle safety matters as one company, then they're one company. But of course, these are, when we're talking about this ETS, we're talking about application to companies who don't always spend a lot of time worrying about safety. I mean, that's, in the manufacturing realm, obviously that's a high focus, but if you have mostly office workers sitting at desks all day, you haven't spent a ton of time thinking about safety. So I say, look to statutes like the FMLA, which is, is it centralized management? Is it centralized HR? Do you kind of operate, at least quasi as one company already? Then yeah, you're going to be considered one company for this purpose. And also, of course, even if you're covered by the ETS, so you can count all your employees to get to that 100, but it may not be that the ETS requirements applies to all your employees. So if you have employees who do not report to a workplace where other individuals are present, you have employees who work exclusively from home, you have employees who work exclusively outdoors, they're not actually going to end up being covered by this. Remember that exclusively outdoors really means exclusively outdoors. And that whole thing about working from home is something to consider. If you've had your employees from home, you may want to just keep them there for a while to kind of see what plays out with this ETS. And we're going to talk about in a few minutes. You may just want to keep them there anyway right now, given everything else that's going on. The other thing that I've been talking to you about, well before the ETS was issued, I thought it was a good idea to find out who's vaccinated in your workforce. Still think it is. And I think that given where we are with the ETS, if you haven't done this, do this. Find out, collect cards. There are some other ways that that your employees can prove their vaccination status, but go ahead and do this. Remember that we consider the vaccination cards medical records. They're going to stay in a separate medical file, however you might maintain those. But if you haven't done this yet, I highly recommend that you go ahead and find out who in your workplace is vaccinated. It's going to help for this purpose. It's going to help for other purposes as well. What does the ETS require? So we did give a much larger summary of this in an earlier town hall, and those slides are available on MEA's website and the Coronavirus Resource Center. But this is sort of just your basics. One of the things for the ETS is you're going to support vaccination by giving employees reasonable time to get vaccinated, reasonable time for recovery, and you see the requirements there. You're going to ensure that employees who are not fully vaccinated are going to be wearing face coverings. when they're around other people. And then the big one, you're going to develop, implement, and enforce your mandatory COVID-19 vaccination policy. And there is that exception with the testing possibilities as a requirement as well. So again, if you haven't thought about this, if you haven't been doing anything about this, I think at this point, at least, you want to get a communication out to your employees and say, hey, this is what's going on. We don't exactly know where this is going to end up, but this is, if the ETS stands, we're going to have no choice but to implement this. And we really need you to get vaccinated as soon as possible, because the sort of fallout, if your employees if you are not complying with the ETS, obviously is monetary penalties, with OSHA doing inspections, with employees potentially reporting you to OSHA, and then getting fined by OSHA. So there was another decision that came out Friday night as well. It doesn't affect quite as many of our members, but the federal contractor vaccine mandate, that stay was upheld. So different court, 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, as of right now, that stay remains in place. So the federal contractor vaccine requirements are suspended. There's going to be further litigation in the 11th Circuit, but given the briefing schedule, I don't expect we'll see a ruling on that until at least late January. So stay tuned on that. And what's interesting on this is everything I was reading when all these various mandates came out was that the legal experts thought that the federal contractor vaccine mandate was the one that would survive legal scrutiny, and that the OSHA 100 employee ETS was the one that would not. So again, who knows? Let's kind of wait and see what happens. And then the other thing I did want to touch on is, what we're all hearing in the news around Omicron. Obviously, case numbers are rising, and we're seeing that impact everywhere. I've used the professional sports leagues as an example before, but it's a really easy place to look because it really does kind of mirror society. So I just saw 47 new NFL players tested positive. NHL is on a pause right now. They've suspended all games, and they're having an issue with going back and forth between Pennsylvania and Canada, because obviously you're dealing with two different countries and their rules. And then NBA has also postponed some games. And of course, if you're an Eagles fan, you know that the Eagles are playing tonight, and that's because the Washington football team that they're playing had such a high number of COVID cases. So that certainly is mirroring what we're seeing in other workplaces. What we're seeing is employers are pushing back their holiday celebrations. Employers who had planned to come back to the office in January are now delaying that return. One of the larger employers that just announced that was Apple. And then we've had a lot of questions on hotline, a lot of questions coming to me. What about requiring the booster? And I've heard Dr. Fauci kind of hem and haw about this a little bit. Is the CDC going to change the definition of fully vaccinated? As you know, fully vaccinated right now means you're 2 weeks post one J&J dose or 2 weeks post your second dose of Moderna or Pfizer. But at the same time, just about everyone is being recommended, or just about every adult is being recommended to get a booster. As of right now, CDC has not changed their definition of fully vaccinated, but there seems to be a little bit of hedging going on at the sort of NIH, CDC, FDA level as to whether or not that might change. So kind of stay tuned on that. You as an employer may want to require a booster for certain employees. Think about your employees who are dealing with the public, employees who travel, employees who have to go into people's homes, for example. Do you require the booster just to have employees come to the office? And of course, you're always weighing, employment law is all about weighing risk. So you're always weighing the safety of your employees, because you have an obligation as an employer to provide a safe workplace. You're weighing the safety of your employees versus the possibility that you're going to lose some employees because they don't want to be told what to do in this realm. But certainly it is something to be thinking about as an employer. No government requirement to require the booster. That's not part of the either mandate, the federal contractor mandate or the large employer mandate, but it certainly is something to be thinking about. All right, so I just answered that question. As part of the ETS, you do not need to require the booster, at least not yet. Anything else, Kevin?
Somebody asked if we have any vendors for on-site testing for non-vac employees. I'm not familiar, although there are places to obtain large volumes of this, the quick home test, if you wanted to use that as your process. you know of anybody that's in the on-site?
I have not seen that, and this changes so rapidly. The names that we were getting last year are probably not the same names that are going to be helpful now. I've always thought that, you know, this would be a good space and people would move into this space, but what we're hearing now is that there is a shortage of test abilities. We're seeing that with hours and hours long lines in some of the big cities.
And someone asked, can you use the non-PCR quick test? I believe you can for the employees.
I believe you can. The issue with home, sort of what we call the home testing kits, is that you can't rely on an employee to take it by themselves and read the results by themselves at home. It's got to be either you've got to view, you or a healthcare professional have to view them taking the test and or reviewing the results of the test.
And yes, it will be recorded and shared. Someone asked a question, why do we see so little in what qualifies as valid medical or religious? I think you've covered that in depth in prior sessions.
We definitely have talked about it. It's really something that you need to make a decision on as a workplace. And if it's something you want to talk through with Hotline, or if you're a member, if you want to talk through with Hotline, you talk through with one of the attorneys through Member Legal Services, we're happy to do that with you.
Somebody said they have an employee that says there's a religious exemption for testing. I've not heard that one before.
Yeah, I've been asked that question before. Could there be a religious exemption from testing? I'd love to hear that, what that religious reason is. But you know, at the end of the day, you as the employer get to say this is an undue hardship. But if it's an undue, if we've got mandatory vaccines or testing for everyone else, and you're not willing to do either, and you have a job that requires you to be around other people, so it's a safety issue, you might ultimately say as an employer, I can't accommodate that. Anticipated timeline of the Supreme Court. I don't know how quickly they're going to do this. This Supreme Court seems to really act on their own timeline. So we'll see.
Well, and the question may be, do they put a stay in place? That'll probably be the first question.
Right. That's the first thing that may or may not happen. My understanding that this goes to Brett Kavanaugh.
So, all right. Well, thank you all. I'm sure when we come back on January the 4th, we will have an update on a lot of this. So please join us then. And we wish everyone a happy and healthy and safe holiday. And thank you again for joining us. And we appreciate the opportunity to serve you all. Take care.